With over 35 years of history and just under 30 entries in the franchise, the Hero of Time has been reincarnated numerous times over and is often celebrated as one of the most iconic video game characters of all time. But what makes the Hero of Time truly timeless? We chat about some of the fundamental characteristics of Link throughout the Legend of Zelda series to try to understand what makes this character so popular. This also made us think about some of our favorite video game characters and why we love them. From the classic heroes that can do no wrong to emo dudes with smug one-liners. Listen on as we try to uncover what makes a good video game protagonist.
Welcome to the 20M podcast. You're a deep dive into video games and the people behind them, but also Arief singing, I suppose. How are you doing today? How are you doing?
I'm doing really good. How are you doing today? Yes, I'm doing good. How are you doing today?
I love what? I love how you're doing today.
I love how you asked me that because I got really angry the last time you asked me that, 2 episodes ago.
Okay, yeah. Why'd you get angry?
Because, I don't know, I just had like this bit about like who asked that. Remember?
Yeah, like people ask that without caring about the response. Is that
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But I genuinely care. And I'm also asking anyone who's listening right now, how are you? Please let me know.
Let's actually do a little experiment with the audience of the 20M podcast.
Mm-hmm.
You should ask, how are you doing today?
Yeah, how are you doing today, audience of the 20M podcast? How will they let us know?
No. And then you just silent. And then so they have the time to respond. So this is like an interactive podcast because this is ultimately a podcast about games, right? How else to make things interactive than have a time for your audience to share how they're doing today?
Yeah, okay. So pause, and then what? It's turn-based. So then
it's
they give their response. And then Arief summons a buff.
Cast haste, yeah. I'm doing really good. My day's been really good so far. I'm doing good. How are you doing?
I'm good. Just I guess at the time of this recording, my mom is in Japan, so I've just been doing a lot of taking her around and stuff. But that's mostly it, personal things. But you, what have you been up to?
My mom is not in Japan.
No, she's not. As far as I know.
I've been, so this is a really interesting one because like I think on the surface level, I have fallen in love with video games again.
With
video games.
Oh, okay. Okay,
just
that's
in
good.
general.
Because I would be worried about our podcast if that were the case.
Okay, I know we're like in a very joking kind of like atmosphere right now, but on a very serious note, I think a lot of people can kind of relate to this, where you fall in and out of video games. Where again, like I know we have exposure in media, we're both creators in the space, and we talk about video games almost 24/7, or we're surrounded by the video games industry almost 24/7. But I know there's a common like feeling in games media coverage, nerds or even just gamers themselves, where like sometimes you just like fall into slumps where you just don't play a lot of games, you don't find a lot of pure enjoyment out of a lot of the games that you're playing, so you're just like, oh yeah, like games are good, but maybe I should do some other stuff right outside of games, which is totally fair, and you should totally consume other forms of media, right?
Yeah,
but for me, I didn't realize how much of a lull I was in, where it's like I feel like the majority of Q1 this year is like a lull. Why are you laughing?
Who says Q1 outside of a corporate slaves? Like
what do you want me to say? What do you want me to say?
January to April, like a normal person.
No. End of the fiscal year. Yeah. I found most joy in, fiscal year Q3 of 2020. No, yeah, I've been doing good, but I've been falling in love with video games, and I've been getting really excited about games again. And there's a particular game that reignited the flames, and it is a game that I did not expect. But I also think like as the launch of this episode, like as this episode releases, one of the other like biggest games of the generation would have launched. So I feel like I'm gonna fall in love more with video games.
No, that is exciting. It's exciting. No, but like I relate to that too. I think it's a combination of things, right? Sometimes maybe you have played a series of games that just didn't interest you, and you're kind of like on board, and then you just kind of fall off. But sometimes a game that launches and it's very exciting, and everyone's joining in, and it's all part of that hype as well. It just keeps things interesting. But I think it's fair. Like I don't know if I could sustain the energy if like, it was like banger after banger, like amazing game after amazing game. Like it's good to kind of have like seasons, I feel. For sure. Yeah,
I completely agree. But funny, no guest this episode. This is episode 10 of the 20M podcast. We don't have a guest. What's up with that, Rina?
It's crazy. We ran out of friends. Sorry, sorry everyone.
Yeah, no, it's quite funny, right? It's like I just wanted to spend some time reflecting on this. Is 10 episodes of the 20M podcast. Like this is completely. I didn't even give you these notes, but I definitely wanted to cover this. We just had an episode launch last week with Sakina from Persona Theory Games. Prior to that, we had Zorzi, Julian from the Consoles, which is such a cool episode. I think one of my favorites because it's like so much about music as well. We've had Sophie, who worked on Gigabash and like hundreds of other independent games, and then June. Like, I feel like we've had a good slate of guests. Would you say so?
I think it's like cutting the pie from like so many different angles, right? You got June, who's sort of from like the platform Xbox side of things. Sophie, who really represents like indies and you know, her role in Southeast Asia. You've got Julian Zorzi, who is from Australia, but also does a lot of work in the independent space. And then the stuff with the consoles is amazing. I guess at the time of this coming out, it'll already be over, but they're doing 2 shows in Japan, and I'm really excited to check that out as well. And then Sakina being a dev as well and producing just such a unique, you know, there's no other game on this planet right now like Cabaret. I think we've tackled quite a lot of people. I'm really proud of like everything we've done so far.
Yeah, I'm really proud. I'm really proud of it as well. But you know what else I'm really proud of?
What?
I'm really proud of a panel that should be out as well.
Oh, tell us about it.
Yeah, which is I just wanted to share with everybody. You know, like it's quite interesting because this podcast is really about highlighting voices behind the devs behind games. Yes, and we've had a lot of guests on that, you know, are giving a little bit of a view of like how games are made or just giving us an insight to the industry as a whole. But I was fortunate enough to host and moderate a panel at LudoNarraCon this past year. Which is, it was just really cool because I wanted to put a panel together about Southeast Asian developers. So we were able to do that, and major props to the Fellow Traveler team and LudoNarraCon for taking in our panel. But basically it's called Beyond Representation, a Southeast Asian approach to narrative games, where you have a bunch of developers from Southeast Asia reflect on, you know, the history, the culture, and the significance of Southeast Asia, and how that makes them approach narrative games differently than other people from different regions or different backgrounds. So it's extremely exciting. Yeah. So I think you can check that out somewhere. We'll put the link somewhere.
We'll put links, on all the social channels. No, that's super cool. And I know we've talked about this offline as well. And it's just like, you know, in the beginning it was like, oh my God, this game is made in Malaysia or Singapore or Philippines, and that was cool. And then now it feels like we're getting past that, and it's like, well, let's reflect on the journey so far, or let's sort of figure out what the way forward looks like. So it feels like, you know, the industry here in Southeast Asia is really growing and really challenging themselves in certain ways, and that's really cool. But before just like maybe one step backwards, like what is LudoNarraCon? Like, do you want to tell people what it's about? Yeah,
LudoNarraCon is basically this like online festival that was started by the Fellow Traveler team, which is a global publisher and a global games publisher, and basically it's a whole online con that con makes it sound like it's a it's a scam, you know. It's a whole it's a whole online convention, but all centered around narrative games. So that's their like bread and butter. So the other panels like this year include like a deep dive between actors and directors from games like Immortality, right? So how do you build a narrative game with those two dynamics, like the actor-director dynamic, right? And then a lot of other deep dives into just accentuating how narrative games are made, or I guess like also just an analysis on how narrative games are done in this day and age compared to previously. So it's just a festival celebrating narrative-oriented games. And I think for our panel, we chose developers from games like Cabaret, A Space for the Unbound, After Love VP, What Comes After. Like, these are all Southeast Asian games, but specifically narrative-based Southeast Asian games. So it's just like it was just a really cool deep dive. Where I feel like, you know, we have a lot of mobile games, we have a lot of like art asset like houses here in Southeast Asia, here in Malaysia. But I think the true bread and butter of like the beauty of video games is also like narrative and story. So just cool to celebrate that.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. Excited to listen to it when it comes out.
Yeah. I mean, the last thing I'll say is that like we ended the panel with kind of like a segment and a tribute to Fami, creator of Coffee Talk. For those that don't know, has sadly passed last year. So it was just such an interesting full circle panel to talk about, you know, narrative games in Southeast Asia while celebrating one of the one of the strongest voices for narrative games and in narrative games, who unfortunately left us. But it was such a beautiful panel. I haven't seen the final cut of it, full disclosure, so I can only remember how it was. But please go check it out and celebrate the amazing independent games from the region. But also props to Fellow Traveler for putting that one together. It's such an awesome con. Convention.
Well, I think that, I mean, that kind of takes us right into our first topic quite seamlessly, right? So we you mentioned earlier there's like a game. By the time this episode comes out, there will be a game that's
a tiny game, a very small game. Yes.
Yeah, a tiny game. Do you want to say the name, or do you want to avoid?
Even if I say the name, I feel like nobody will even recognize. You know.
Sure. Yeah.
This
exactly.
little game called The Legend of Zelda: Tears of the Kingdom will be out and in players' hands. Like, look, the person listening to this podcast is probably playing Tears of the Kingdom as they listen to this podcast
while they're listening
right?
to us, and that would be the greatest honor, right? Like have us as your second monitor, have Link like in your hand, something like that.
Yeah.
But I guess like because it's such an iconic game, it kind of made both of us think about, protagonists and the role of the protagonist and what makes good and bad protagonists in video games, right? Because these are characters that are basically, the plot centers around them, and the players have to see the world through their eyes. So it's a very interesting sort of element to be focusing on this time. But since I almost did the Breath of the Wild.
Breath of the Wild, yeah.
Breath of the Wild 2. Since Zelda Tears of the Kingdom is out or is coming out, maybe we can talk a bit about Link, I guess, since he's basically one of the first characters you think of when you think about like video game protagonists, right?
Yeah. I think our main topic of the show is like really diving deep into what makes a good video game protagonist, but specifically I guess like when we thought about this question and like what we wanted to cover, right? I was like, what does make Link a good video game protagonist? Like in all seriousness, So before maybe we get into that, because I also know there are other video game protagonists that I want to touch on that I might have specific gripes on. Yeah. But also for the people that might be listening, it's like, who are your favorite video game protagonists? And maybe through this part of the discussion, like what makes them a good video game protagonist in your mind, right? That's also a setup for you soon, but I've
got some thoughts
on the best video game protagonist of all time, the little like dragon thing from Bubble Bobble or whatever.
Puzzle Bubble.
Sure.
Is that okay, the green one, the green dragon, I think.
I thought he was blue. Anyway. Clearly not the best video game protagonist. I was just like really curious, like what makes Link a good video game protagonist? And maybe before we get into that, what is your exposure to The Legend of Zelda?
Are you calling me out?
Yes, I am.
You're absolutely calling me out. Wow.
Yeah.
Like none. I didn't grow up a lot on Nintendo games, but even despite that, like I do know like the name Link. I do know The Legend of Zelda, and it's very much a mainstay in like the general, like when you think of video games, you think of these characters and this IP in particular. But no, I'm not familiar with that at all, so I'm hoping to learn a bit more from you, since you're someone who has a lot of exposure with the series, right?
Yeah, it's quite funny. I don't have like hyper exposure to the series. I didn't grow up with it because I never owned Nintendo consoles outside of the Game Boy, like the handheld
right?
systems.
I
did have an SNES, but like my dad didn't buy Zelda games for the SNES.
Like if we're being completely honest, if you're from Southeast Asia, except maybe not Singapore, if you're from Southeast Asia, you probably grew up playing a PlayStation because that was the only console that could be chipped, right?
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. Like I think even like Xboxes were a bit more popular than like all my affluent friends had like a Nintendo console.
Yep.
We should talk about that on a separate
Oh my god, this is your next thesis, Arief. It's like the parallels between being like the top 1% in Southeast Asia and whether you're familiar with Zelda or not.
Yes, correct. Right. The only people that can engage in riveting discussion around Tears of the Kingdom are people who like had strong economic childhoods. Yeah. No, so I didn't grow up with like Zelda. I was more of a Pokemon guy. I was more of
same.
What else is Nintendo? Mario, like 100% Mario, right? But so Zelda was an interesting one because played a lot of Smash growing up, right? Melee, and then obviously Brawl and whatnot. And like Link was always like a go-to character because of his up B. Smash players know exactly what I'm talking about. Up B in every game is just such a good recovery. So it's like, okay, Link, recovery, good,
Okay.
But for me, I recently, like maybe over the past 7 to 10 years, I started to get into Legend of Zelda. So I played Ocarina of Time, Wind Waker, A Link to the Past. I tried Skyward Sword, couldn't finish it, and then obviously Breath of the Wild, right? So my exposure is there. But I feel like there's a lot of conversation and whatnot to be had around like Link after just even knowing these games, right?
So at least like for me, as someone who doesn't really know the IP very well. Like, how would you describe Link as a person?
Oh my god, that's the $1,000,000 question. He is nothing, Link is nothing. No,
So
it's
he's a
really important
self-insert type?
context. Sorry?
Self-insert type? Like
Yeah.
he's a blank slate so the players can mold themselves around it, or like how
Yeah,
does
so
it
I
work?
think the beautiful thing about Nintendo, which is super fascinating, is that they made a character that has just enough personality that that it's Link and it's not, nameless protagonist, whilst also creating a world where basically the lore of Legend of Zelda, for those that don't know, right? And it's like every game is a different iteration of Link and Zelda, where the world resets basically. Like every Link is a reincarnation of the hero of time. So they're all called Link, but they're all just reincarnations of the same being, right? Same
Is
thing
there
with
no
Zelda.
canon?
It is canon. There's 3 different timelines where I think 3 plus timelines, but every game pretty much, unless they're like direct sequels, is a different version of Link and Zelda in this like chronological timeline. So Nintendo did this like really weird, beautiful thing where it's the most cop-out video gamey thing ever, where you start from scratch, in the next
Every
game.
single time.
Yeah, every single time, but they made sense of it, where the hero of time is reincarnated, and that is Link, and he has just enough of a personality to be a person, whilst also being a completely blank slate. Like he's a silent protagonist, and his only goal in life is basically to help Zelda in their quest or save Princess Zelda. So I think that's a little preface to Link. But then the question comes up is like, what makes Link a good video game protagonist? Like, I'm curious, like, do you have any general thoughts on Link, just like from what you've seen in passing? Like, do you know who Link is? Like, what is Link to you? Like, what do you think of when you think about Link?
Just a dude with kind of looks like an elf, as in like a
Yeah.
Christmas elf.
Yeah.
But I didn't know that about the reincarnation thing, and I think that is like both genius and a cop out, because it's like you can just because think of so many other IPs like people like Ash Ketchum, and the perennial dilemma is like he has no character development. But what if you just say like, oh well, he resets at the end of every journey, so what character
Every Elite
development?
Four battle,
he just
resets.
gets like the Men in Black like boom thing, and then like just
Yeah.
forgets everything and just starts over.
Yeah.
But I think it also means that like because of that, then you can kind of jump in at any point in the series and not feel like, oh, I had to play the first game or the second game, right? You can just come in and it's Link is as new as you are, right?
Totally. I think it's like, I was thinking about this in the context of history of video games as well, and Nintendo, where think about like some of the best silent protagonists in video games. Like, I feel like most of them would be Nintendo based, where it's like Mario, Link, okay, Kirby, sure, I don't know, it's like debatable, right? But Samus, these are all like huge IP even to this day, but they don't say anything. Like, what does Mario say? Like, it's a me, Mario. Like, what does Samus Aran say? I don't think Samus really says
talks.
anything. Kirby is like, ha, hey. Ha,
Well,
hey.
Kirby does like, I mean, like, yeah, he doesn't speak, but he does actually. I'm not too sure, since these are not games I'm like super familiar with. But like, despite whether they actually verbally communicate or not, do you get a sense for their character, or are they just yes?
Exactly, and that's what I think like is like brilliant about it, where like Nintendo embodies these like mannerisms or whatever. Because I was gonna say that like it's I think the point that I was trying to make is like these video game characters that were silent protagonists because of the state of video games back in the day, where they were like very pixelated, very rudimentary.
No
just
voice acting.
Yeah,
is
no
anything,
voice
right?
acting, nothing, right? Like
Yeah,
just the
yeah.
state of games to now that they're still like silent. I know like Zelda has a voice actor, and they're experimenting with evolving like some of the characters that way. But to me, it just reminds me of like it's the same thing with like Doomslayer and Doom, right? Like silent protagonists that were from older video games that are now transported into like this new age of video games, but they're still relatively like silent avatars, right? So it's kind of a reflection of the times. But yeah, I think Link specifically is like, when I think about Link, I think about his goofiness as well. Like
Oh, is he? He's good.
picking up a vase and throwing it against the wall. It's like, such a Link thing to do, right? Which is one thing. So I was curious to like, I wanted to
Out
like,
of context,
see.
that's really weird. I'm like,
No, it's totally like it's totally a thing. But like I think there's like elements of like even Mario or whatever, like these silent protagonists, when they're goofy, it almost makes them even more relatable. Which like in my mind makes me curious, like, does a goofy, fun, like levity type character in video games make it a relatable character? You know?
Probably to an extent. I mean, like when I think of a silent protagonist, I'm thinking of like Crash from Crash Bandicoot.
Exactly.
But he's not even. He's like beyond goof. He's like a freaking moron at this point, right? But like he's a lovable moron in that sense. And I get that, but that is like his entire personality. It's like him just, like when you play Crash, like when he dies, he always dies in like the most comical way.
Yeah.
Like if he touches a spike, he just falls, and then like his like spirit like starts like flapping to the top. Or if he like touches a TNT and it explodes, and like only his shoes remain, and there's like bits of him everywhere.
Totally.
Yeah. So I think so. I guess it depends on the tone of the game as well. But even with that said, even if it's a serious game, you do see them kind of like break character sometimes, and it is quite funny.
Yeah, I think the other thing that like, in our quest to answer like, is Link a good video game protagonist? It's like, I don't know, because like he's goofy, he does remind me a lot of Crash. I think that was another like instance of it, like these the era of video games where maybe the levity is what like got kids to play games or whatever. But I also think like the fascinating thing about Link is that he's such a relatable protagonist in a way where I think this is the beauty of what Nintendo does with him. But like every Legend of Zelda story is a zero to hero story. And every circumstance is different, and every Link has their own personality, which is something I want to like bring up in a bit. But like every Legend of Zelda is like you start as a boy named Link who is in way over his head by the time you find out what the call to action of the game is, right? Saving the princess, stopping calamity, fixing time itself. And it's like, but you're always this like small village kid who just wants to sleep and like mess around or whatever, right? But I think that's a fascinating thing that they did, where it's like the zero hero story makes Link a phenomenal protagonist because you truly feel like the hero moments in every Zelda game, once you get to full force, or once the moments of crescendo really hit, is like, oh yeah, we started at like this tiny like Kakariko village or whatever. It's like this tiny village. So I think that's another thing about like why I'm so fascinated by Link and this topic of like, is he a good protagonist, right?
I mean, it sounds like it's at the core of it, it's a very classic sort of like hero goes to save the princess story, which is very fairy tale, right? But then, as you said, like in every game, there's like a sort of a different iteration, and Link is a bit different each time. Do you feel like that story has evolved to be a bit more modern or a bit more contemporary? Is he more of a modern Link in that sense today?
That's such a good question, right? Because like I don't know, because in Breath of the Wild, right, despite how people love that game, and me included, right, and you spend hundreds and hundreds of hours in the game, it's not really for the story. Story is super basic, right? And I don't know what it's going to be like for Tears of the Kingdom, but for the rest of the Zelda games, the story is just enough there that there is emotion and there is a calling and there is like gravitas to it. But I don't think it's like maybe it's not about modernizing it. Maybe it's just about like making sure that the rest of the Zelda mechanics come through to complement the story enough. But the thing that's like different is that, again, maybe it's not about modernizing the story, is like every story is different. Like it's super funny because when I was playing Smash Bros, and I don't know who can relate to this, but when you're playing Smash Bros and you have all the Links unlocked, you have Toon Link, Young Link, and then Link, right? Which is your main adult Link. To me, I don't know who else experiences this, but like to me, when I choose the Link characters, I think that they're all different personalities to me, despite being one character. And so I think it's like, to me, Toon Link is like, wow, the struggles that Toon Link went through is different than what like, Ocarina Link went through, and specifically young Ocarina Link versus like the adult Ocarina Link. So there's this like weird concept where like, as a silent protagonist, as a shell of an avatar, if you will, right, for the players, maybe he's a phenomenal protagonist because you relate more to his journey. You remember more about like how his character was built via the game itself. Like when I think about Toon Link, I think about all the like trials and tribulations that Toon Link went through to get to the end of that game, despite being the same technical like character, right, in video games. So it's such a weird phenomenon for me.
It's like this is like I think this is like your Eva fan coming out, or like your psychoanalysis kind of person, where it's like we're all like who we are and our inner child, we're all separate people and that sort of thing. But I get that. I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, the last thing that I'll say on the like Zelda specific dive, right, about protagonists here is that like to me, The Legend of Zelda is also about like supporting characters. Where it's not really about Link and Zelda, it's about Link, Zelda, Ganon, the different races within each game as well, whether it be like the underwater area, the mountainous area, the wooden area, like Epona the horse. So to me, it's almost as if like Link as a character works because he has less personality and less iconic, I guess, points to him, but because it allows the other characters to be highlighted, right? But I'm curious, like, do you see that in any other games?
I've seen that in a way that I didn't like it, and in a way that the fandom doesn't seem to like it, which is so like with Genshin Impact, we gotta talk about Genshin.
Oh my god,
I was gonna come out later anyway,
sure.
But like, so with Genshin, like the traveler is a silent protagonist. Like literally,
Totally.
the traveler is the only person who doesn't speak. When in a game that's like fully voice acted, and you've got this like flying idiot thing, which is Paimon, who does the talking for you. So you'll choose, if you're in dialogue, there's like an A, B, C choice. You pick A, and then Paimon like kind of riffs off of what you said. And it's super annoying because like, well, one, like not many people like Paimon's voice acting. But second, it's like, why is that the case? Like if someone was going to speak anyway, then why don't you just let the protagonist speak? And she kind of just does. It's just a really bizarre, really jarring for me. I feel like because when everyone is like talking and making animation, and then it cuts to your character and she's like playing charades. It's like
yeah.
It feels really weird, but I think that was probably a deliberate choice, because they wanted that sort of like, you know, make them a bit bland, make the characters bland as possible, so that the player can feel like it's them or something. But then you get the fandom who kind of like psychoanalyzes it a bit more. They're like, oh, Lumine, who's the female character, and Aether, who's the male character. Oh, Lumine is sassier than Aether because in this particular scene, like her eye like moves up by like 5 degrees, so she's like kind of giving a raised eyebrow, and therefore she, you know, she's got some spunk. And I'm like, man, we're really like fighting for our lives out here just to get some kind of character from our protagonist.
I mean, talking about like the influences of like Genshin and Zelda, or like the thread between them, right? Is like Paimon is basically Navi in like Ocarina of Time, right? Where it's like this floating thing that follows you around, and it's really annoying, and it's like, hey, listen, hey, you know, and it's like, Paimon, shut up, you know. It's like, I've already had this in Ocarina, you don't have to give me this experience again. But it is like another one, right, where it's like you have something else speak for you. And again, this is totally, I think this is very basic and it's not a secret, right? But I guess it is totally that relatability aspect where you need to feel as immersed as possible in games. So therefore having a silent protagonist is like, and maybe something that's not the character that you're playing, doing more voiceover or giving more context builds that aspect of immersion. But the other fascinating thing is like, you know what Link does compared, what's another aspect of like silent protagonist that I find interesting, where even though Link is an avatar for our decisions and what we do, he still always does the morally good thing. Like in cutscenes, he's always doing the right thing. In the story, he's always doing the right thing. Where I think of things where like silent protagonists in other video games, like BioShock, the first BioShock game, right? Where you are going through a character and you are going through the story, and it is a silent protagonist, and people are speaking to you, all that kind of stuff. But you have the choice to do good or bad, right?
Yeah.
So it's I don't know if it's like a Nintendofication of it, or maybe it's like a more optimistic view of the world where games should ultimately like make you feel morally good. But I'm just thinking of like BioShock as another example of like a phenomenal video game, but very questionable protagonist, right? Because you have the choice.
I think it's also just like the thing with like what's the objective of the game, who's the target demographic, and all those sort of things, right? Because like in some cases, a lot of us want to just self-insert and be that cool protagonist going through the world and that sort of thing. But I also feel like in other games, like maybe you want to be a character that you not necessarily are, but you aspire to be. So you have like, let me think of who's in that sort of vein. I just think more about like, you know, like young adult fiction kind of books. Like when you think about like, say like the Harry Potter series, it's like we might not identify with the protagonist Harry, but he embodies like certain righteous traits that we wish we could do or wish we could be in that sense. And that comes through in like other kind of games where the protagonist isn't silent and does have a personality, but it doesn't necessarily mean the game is not as immersive. It just means that you're, I don't know, like cosplaying as someone else, or like you know, that sort of thing. I think it just really depends on the game.
So general question, who, and this goes to the audience as well, right? Like, who are some of your favorite video game characters? And why are they a good protagonist?
Are we waiting 5 seconds for them to answer?
Yeah, we're waiting for this. Folks who are listening to the Tonya podcast, just shout it out right now. Ready? 1, 2, 3. That's a terrible protagonist, audience member. Wow, I can't believe you.
I can't believe you just said that. Wow.
Yeah,
Talk
wow.
about getting cancelled. I will talk about Squall from Final Fantasy VIII.
Yep.
So I think the Final Fantasy series, I mean, obviously there are not many of the older ones are voiced, but the characters all do have distinct personalities, and there's not, aside from maybe like 14, which you're probably more familiar with, but they don't have that element of like, oh, I'm going to self-insert, right? Squall is Squall. He's an angsty teenager. I think it's like 18 or 19 or something. When you start off the game, he's just like really cold. Most of the answers, like when you're talking to people, there is one that's like slightly more polite where he's like, okay, and then the next one is just like ... or like whatever. You know, I think that's like the meme for nowadays when people talk about Final Fantasy VIII, like they just put the dialogue box, like bracket whatever bracket.
Yeah.
But then he does get like he does grow as a character, and then like you can see his dialogue options change a bit more. He's a bit more attached to people. He starts off with just being that I don't care, no one understands me, I'm this kid from this orphanage, and you know, I don't like anyone, and then gets thrusted with all this responsibility. So he does grow, and I think he starts to realize that he can rely on people. It's okay to have friends, it's okay to build relationships, because I suppose before it was more like commitment issues or fear of like losing someone you love, so you just don't love anyone. So I like that, and I think in that sense it is kind of like a coming of age story. And if you're playing that as a teenager, you've probably gone through, you obviously haven't like fought sorceresses in your real life, but you've obviously gone through that sort of phase where you feel misunderstood, or you're questioning your friendships, and you're maybe finding romance along the way. So I think they wrote him in a way that is very like teenager going into young adult kind of phase.
Yeah. And I'm going to bring up another example that's a complete opposite, right? And maybe, I don't know which one is better, but maybe on the other end of the spectrum, maybe just talking about JRPGs, is like Tidus and Sora in Kingdom Hearts, where I think these two characters are just bumbling, bumbling idiots that are very brazenly optimistic for no apparent reason whatsoever. They're just like really dumb, goofy, hyper optimistic characters that just want to do good in the world, I guess. And to me, it's almost like that's annoying. Like, I don't know if like the teen angst is more annoying, or the like just pure optimism. Like, haven't you experienced the real world? Like, how are you this happy? You know, it's like.
So I mean, Sora for sure does, like at the beginning, especially when you play Kingdom Hearts 1, like it's annoying because I liked Riku so much more. Like Riku was so much more determined in what he wanted. Like I always think about that scene where he's like, the winner gets to share a papu with Kairi, and Sora is like, oh, like I don't know how I feel about anything. And it's like, make a decision, damn it. Like Riku's clearly saying he's like, I'm gonna go get her if you don't.
You don't,
it's like Sora was like emotionally incapable of like processing jealousy or processing, you know, actually liking Kairi and things like that. But I don't know. Maybe he needed to be kind of that like unbelievable levels of optimism, because he's gonna be hanging out with Disney characters.
So he is a dumb Disney character.
Yeah, he has to be a dumb Disney character. It has to be a happy ending. Everyone has to be good. Good is good, evil is evil.
Exactly. And that's the thing, it's like good is good, evil is evil, because I think there's a fascinating discussion to be had about like video game protagonists, and like, are they good video game protagonists, as in like, are they morally good video game protagonists, or are they good video game protagonists where like you feel like they really propel the story, you feel very immersed in the game, right? Because I think those are two separate discussions. But on the one of like Sora, it's like he's just a good, morally good video game protagonist, and I hate him for it. Like, Kingdom Hearts is my favorite game property of all time, but when I think about Kingdom Hearts and I think about the characters that are good, I think about Roxas, I think about Aqua, I think about like Axel, right? Like there's Riku,
people who are flawed and selfish and make mistakes,
like even King Mickey, right, has a more fascinating character arc than what a sentence, like King Mickey. Like Mickey Mouse has a better character arc in Kingdom Hearts than Sora, the main character. But yeah, I was like, I'm happy to shit on Sora, and I love him, and I like, you know, there's so much connection that I have with that character, and I do love that character. But I think he's the worst character in Kingdom Hearts.
Do you feel he's grown from Kingdom Hearts 1, 2, and 3?
Just barely. He's still such a dummy, but just ever so slightly, you know? Which is a fascinating one, because again, talking about like how video games can guide your moral compass, I think his optimism and his like just pure goodness did like ultimately make me a better person growing up, because like that's what you're surrounded by. It's almost as if that's the norm, right? As opposed to maybe surrounding yourselves with Rikus who it's like, I must embrace the darkness. Therefore, you know, it's like if your favorite character is Ganon in Legend of Zelda, clearly you've got it. Like you needed to go to therapy, you know? Which is not bad, but it's like, you know, we all have that darkness in our hearts. But it goes to like, I was thinking about protagonists like Joel in The Last of Us, right? Or maybe some of the characters in that property where, without spoiling The Last of Us, like I think it's no secret that there are no good or bad people in that video game. You know, it is all ambiguous, and maybe everybody is bad, right? But for their own reasons. So I still think like, you know, Abby, Joel, even Ellie, like they're good protagonists because they bring you like into the immersion of the story, and they, you know, they're fascinating people that go through different journeys, but they're not morally good protagonists, right? As opposed to Link and Nintendo, where it's like, I think it's universal because it's like, oh, Link is always going to do good, right? So maybe there's another question there. It's like, does Squall do good at the end of the day? I don't know. I've never played Final Fantasy VIII.
Does Squall do good at the end of the day? I think he has mostly always... I think he, because of that growth, like in the beginning, he was quite selfish in that he just didn't care. It was like pure apathy. It wasn't the case where he has like is faced with like two different difficult decisions to make. He's just like, I'm just out, you know, that kind of thing. And then the more responsible you throw on him, and he eventually becomes like the head of the entire garden, which is like the school, which is like makes no sense, because like the headmaster's like, all right, you take control. He's like, bro, I'm literally 18. But it kind of like, when you put pressure on a character like that, then like who he really is comes out, and then you realize, oh, actually he is very responsible. Actually he does have good leadership qualities. I think there was some moments of conflict because there's like, you know, I don't even know if I should put a spoiler on a 20-plus-year-old game. It's fine, I think. But there are like some characters where it's like, oh, they've turned evil. How do we bring them back into the fold? And I think there are sort of moments of conflict like that. But he's mostly good. I do think most of the Final Fantasy protags are mostly pretty good. They're not anti-heroes from none that I can think of at the moment right now. Anyway.
Yeah. Again, I don't know if there's like a right answer to this, but in video games, like you said, to me, it's such a fascinating medium because you actually walk in the shoes of these characters, right? So this question of like, is Link a good protagonist? Like maybe on the surface level, there are good moral nature aspects to him that make him a good protagonist, but also maybe because of the lack of general personality, silence, you know, avatar shell type of a thing, it allows us to think he's a good protagonist as well, because he is us. But yeah, I think like it depends on the video game's like purpose as well, right? There's so many facets to like, does the video game want you to feel like a bad person? Does it want you to make the decisions for yourself, right, to give you the agency? Or is it just a pure mechanics thing where it's like you just have a good protagonist just to experience the mechanics of the game? I don't know.
I think like for example with Danganronpa, like because it's like a murder mystery kind of game, the main characters that they give you in each of the games are pretty good at just being in that role of like, I don't know what's going on, but let's figure it out together. So they're this is not a spoiler at all. All of them are like the ones that generally just have no abilities whatsoever. Like the first guy in Danganronpa 1, he won like the lottery, so he's like the lucky student, as in that's his ability. He goes to school where everyone is at like super world class in whatever skill they are, whether it's like baseball or singing, and he's just like, I'm lucky, I won the ballot, and he comes in. And then like there's all those feelings, like his name is Makoto Nagi, and there's all these feelings of, like inadequacy, like, oh, why am I here? Why am I with these elite students? And then like, but because he is like the only rational thinker, like everyone else is just like insane, which I think is also a kind of like a throw at like, you know, if you're like a genius in some area, you're probably just not, you know, regular society folk. So he kind of takes the reins, he like leads the investigations, and he plays that, I think he plays a really good role of being like, I don't know enough, but I'm with you on this journey, like you're like as the player, and we're gonna like solve the crimes together and things like that as well. Because in that scenario, you kind of have someone who's like too morally strong either way, because you as a player are meant to make these kind of choices, and you also kind of have someone who's just like too much of like a strong personality again, because especially in visual novel settings, like you're really meant to be living in that scenario, you know.
No, completely, and that's why I find this like topic so fascinating to me, right? Where it's like Legend of Zelda, one of the biggest franchises of all time in the games industry. You know, Tears of the Kingdom, likely going to be like one of the biggest games of this generation or this time frame. Like, what this question on protagonist and like, does it service the player? Is such a fascinating one, right? Because then it goes back to like, if somebody were to ask you like, who are some of the best video game characters, right? Like, who would you say? And it's like, oh yeah, I think of Link, or these kinds of things. But it's just like, yeah, you're right, it's such a fascinating medium where you can have a lot of like nuanced discussions about this, because you are literally playing the shoes of the character, right? Because sometimes, I don't know, there are some games where it's like, I wouldn't do that, but you know, my Geralt in Witcher 3, the way that I'm building him and his experiences so far, he would do this, but like I would do something else, right? So there's like elements of like role play as well, obviously, right, in RPG games. But yeah, I don't know, just such a fascinating flipping discussion. I think the TLDR is that like, when is Zelda gonna get her game? Because I'm good with Link, you know. That's a whole separate discussion within itself. I think that'd be a pretty fascinating one. Like, does Zelda warrants like a game of Zelda?
It's super exciting. Well, yeah, by the time this episode comes out, I'm sure the game will be out. So let us know what you think of Tears of the Kingdom, and if you like Link, if you hate Link, and who your other favorite protagonists are.
I think there's going to be a lot of Ganon. Have you seen the fan art for Ganon?
No,
like,
I have not. Is this
God bless you. God bless you, because I'm pretty sure my theory is that like people are going to fall in love with Ganondorf in this game,
okay.
voiced by Matt Mercer.
Right. But speaking of falling in love with characters, this is a rare occurrence on the 20M podcast. Like, both Rino and Arief are actually playing the same video game at launch, and we both like it. Wow. Yeah. Amazing. Like, no disagreements overall, you know. Yeah, so far. So this game, this tiny game as well, is a Honkai Star Rail. I keep saying Honkai.
Almost. I know you almost said it. Yeah. So Honkai Star Rail, which is the second, like technically second. I think it depends on how you, I guess, read the Hoyoverse sort of like history as a game developer. But this is the second title to be called like Honkai. As we both know, sort of sci-fi, not fantasy-esque like Genshin. It's a sci-fi turn-based RPG, kind of set in space, and you visit planets. You play as a semi-silent protagonist, I guess. You play as the Trailblazer, who was awakened. We'll not go into spoilers, but who was awakened, and you're trying to figure out who you are and your role in this sort of universe, and you meet really cool characters along the way. How's that? That's a great intro. Yeah. But what makes Honkai Star Rail though? You know, what's the differentiator between Genshin for those that don't know this game? All right, well, I'll start with the different comparisons. So Genshin versus Honkai Star Rail. Genshin is action-based RPG, and it's open world, whereas Honkai, as we mentioned, is turn-based. So it's a bit more like your classic Final Fantasy kind of gameplay. And it's not a true open world, because you can't just like run in all directions and interact with everything. It's very much like you've got zones in the world map, and then you can only explore to a certain extent. So it is, in that sense, it's quite a big departure from Genshin. And then to compare that to the first Honkai, which I think is also turn-based, they share a lot of the same characters, but you don't actually need to have played the first Honkai, because maybe similar to how you were explaining Legend of Zelda, it's the same characters but in an alternate universe. So even though they share the same names, or they look similar, they're separate people who have different personalities and different backstories. Yeah. So you might benefit from, like, if you were like a Bronya main in Honkai the Third, you'd be like, oh my god, it's Bronya again, but it's actually a different Bronya. Interesting. The only, so far, that's been told, as far as I understand, the only character that's actually the same person throughout is Welt. Yeah, because I saw that as well. Welt in Third did some magic thingy and left and entered this world. So he's got the memories from the past game. Yeah, I think like there's very good recap on like the story, and I think that's like exactly how I would have described it as well, right? For people that don't know, because I didn't know what I was getting into at all, but pretty solid encapsulation. Maybe my question is somebody who, just to give some historical context, of the 20M podcast, it's like, no, like Reno loves Genshin Impact. That's like one of Reno's like biggest like games, right? Like how does Star Rail compare to Genshin? I guess like the general question is, how are you enjoying the game so far, and how does it stack up in terms of Genshin, like less so on a story level, but more so like enjoyment level?
I want to future-proof my opinion because like I really, really like Honkai right now, and I'm like very into it. I'm like, it's like what you were saying earlier, like falling in love with video games all over again. Like I'm going out, hang out with my mom and showing her Japan, and then I'm like, oh my god, I'm going to go home soon. I'm going to get to play Honkai. Like that excitement of like coming home to play video games. I haven't felt that in a long time, probably since like Genshin first came out. So I really like it. And the way I find that it's different is, I think obviously because it's new, like that element of newness means like everything is sort of novel and you're not stuck in the same rut. Whereas with Genshin, for a long time, everyone is stuck doing your dailies, which is literally like your Genshin chores. Like, oh, I've got to fight 4 monsters. I got to jump on this mushroom 4 times. It's like the most like brain dead kind of content, but you got to do it if you want to like farm the materials that you want to pull for the characters you want. So far with Honkai, I haven't encountered that just because it's new, but also there's the auto battling system, which I know you've got some thoughts on as well. This is my first time playing a game where there's like this auto mode. And when I first heard about it, I was like, this is ridiculous. Like, I want to play a game to play a game. Why would I want the game to play itself? It doesn't make sense. But as I've found with playing it so far, it's really freeing. It's pretty much like the casual way that I think Hoyoverse is trying to make their games. It's like you don't need to be focused all the time. If you've set up your characters to be good, then you already know you're going to win this battle. So why do you want to just go through it again and again and again? So let them deal with it, and then you can like do other stuff. Like I'm searching on the side like how to build the characters. I'm watching videos from other content creators about how I can improve the character setup. But you don't need to go through the grind. Like that's the thing. The grind is not there, and I think that means the players are less fatigued overall. But what are your thoughts on auto battling?
I just wrote down in my notes as I was playing this game is like I put in all caps like on my notepad, like just giant letters on my notebook. I was like, of course this game has auto battling because there's a lot of like Genshin and Honkai is like they're mobile games as well, and they're very, very, very polished. Arguably, like I think definitely AAA level like games that also happen to work on mobile, but inherently a lot of the mechanics behind these games are mobile oriented, right? So the auto battling is like it's such a mobile thing because you're supposed to be playing passively, like you said, you build up your characters and you just like keep going and going and going, but you got to set up the battles, right? So I think it was just one of those things where I was like, oh, like turn based, but like oh, of course it has like auto battling, and it does make it a lot easier. But I think overall, my general thoughts on it before gets in some specific things is that like the magic of like Genshin is almost like a joke game to me, and I need to preface that by like not like the game itself. Like to me, it's a joke because everybody always jokes about it. It's like, oh, you should get into Genshin, or it's like, oh, I can't play Genshin, or it's like, hey, Arief, you're gonna spend so much money in Genshin. It's like there's like comedic aspects of playing Genshin, right? So I was like, oh, like I'll play it, and I do really enjoy it. I think Genshin is a phenomenal game, but oh my god, like Honkai Star Rail is on another level that speaks to me because it's almost as if they want to make Square Enix bankrupt or something, where it's like, hey, we're gonna like Persona 5, get that out of here. Like this is gonna be the definitive AAA turn-based like game that's gonna live in everybody's hearts and minds for the next couple of years, So the amount of polish and the amount of like genuine just fun that I'm having with this game is so shocking to me. And like I mentioned, I think without being too hyperbolic, it's hard for me to remember the last time I was like, oh, I really want to go home and play this game. And I think the difference is like, when you play amazing AAA games, like, the last long experience that I had was probably God of War Ragnarok, right? Those games are phenomenal but they're single player. And so for me, it's like I binge consume where I would be out with friends or whatever in between a play session. I'd be like, oh, I can't wait to go home and play God of War. But then I'll play like 6 hours of God of War. Star Rail is different because of its like type of game, where it is a daily type of game as well, even though there is like story and single player mode where you come back to this game daily, and I'm like, wow, I can't wait to log in later and get my rewards. Right? Whilst playing a phenomenal like built JRPG basically. So I'm just so surprised how much I've been falling in love with this game. But I know we have a lot to say about like specifically why we love this game. Where do you want to take this conversation? What stuck out the most to you about Honkai Star Rail?
I think the story, like, I know it's like really annoying to keep comparing it to Genshin, and a lot of like purists will be like, they're very different because one is action, one is turn-based, and the blah blah blah, like all these like minute reasons. But I do think it's impossible because there are so many similarities, and they're not coincidences. Like Hoyoverse has deliberately made these decisions, right? So in terms of the story, I feel like this is a lot more polished. Like with Genshin, it was very vague in both in the storytelling and also just in the way, like both in the story itself and the way it was told. Genshin is like, I know like things are meant to that's the thing with these kind of games. It's like you're not meant to know the whole story. You know, things are unfolding. It's like chapter 1, chapter 2, right? But with Genshin, it was just so hard to follow. But with Honkai, I think so far, even though it's like sci-fi and for me normally, like I respond better to fantasy worlds compared to like a sci-fi element, just because like when they get really technical, I just kind of like switch off. I found it like pretty easy to follow. The absence of Paimon is wonderful. I think okay, like just I guess to summarize my arguments about like Star Rail versus Genshin, it's like I think a lot of the pain points that people thought Hoyoverse was not listening to us with Genshin, it's like, oh, they're not listening to us when we say Paimon sucks, they're not listening to us when we say we don't like the grind. They've just been like sitting on it like, we will take these and make Star Rail a better game. We're not gonna, like, Genshin's like, the ship has sailed, we're not gonna change that, like, you guys are just gonna have to deal with it. But so many things I feel are like better in Star Rail because they heard what the players were saying in Genshin and they've implemented it.
Yeah, I think for maybe the reason why I think this is a more fascinating game for people to look into than Genshin, right, is that I think colloquially there's like a different subsect of gamers that play Genshin. It's like maybe a bit more like anime, weeby, like gacha oriented like type players, which again, nothing wrong with that, right? It's just like a genre of maybe the game's populace, or maybe also mobile oriented type gamers or people that are willing to spend a lot of money. Like there's this category. So I feel like oftentimes in general games media or the general games conversations on a macro level, Genshin doesn't get the type of respect it does with other games, like when you talk about a Final Fantasy or when you talk about a Legend of Zelda or whatever, right? And this is like it's such a fascinating one to me, but I think Honkai Star Rail might be there. To me, it's like if you are a gamer that has not played Genshin, you're missing out on how mind-blowingly amazing Hoyoverse is as a developer. Where I think like Honkai Star Rail is one of those games where it's like people need to be paying attention to this game because some of the things they do in this game is like top of the class in this entire industry, right? Where I feel like Genshin has most of those elements, but because of maybe the nature of the game, it often gets sidelined. So I think just going back to your point about like, yeah, this, like more people need to be paying more attention to this game because of how genuinely phenomenal it is, and it also makes it maybe a bit more palatable because it's a JRPG where maybe people are more familiar with that like general genre or whatever have you. But yeah, there's so many things that I could say about like it's such a I don't know, like things about the animation. The animation, in my opinion, is some of the best animation I've seen in games in a while, right? And it's so flipping beautiful and amazing and eye-catching and whatever. It's like how and I can't wait for Final Fantasy 16 to come out, right? But how can other developers stack up against the amazing stuff that they're doing, that Hoyoverse is doing in their games? Like it was just a wake-up call to me where it's like people need to be paying attention to Hoyoverse as a developer and like giving them the respect that they deserve.
I think that you've made like a really good point. Like obviously there are different like, you know, business structures of how games can become profitable, whether you pay it up front, whether it's free to play with gacha elements, whether it's free to play with like other freemium where things or DLC content that you buy, right? And unfortunately, gacha obviously gets a bad rap because it is very akin to gambling and people are spending thousands and that's just, you know, depending on your means, like obviously that's not great and it's not great to build that kind of habit in like the younger generation who might be playing. So I understand all of that. But for example, like the fact that we're all playing it, you know, you, myself, and our entire friend group is great. And it's only possible, I think, because you know, it's free. Like we can all just get into the game. If we don't like it, we just bounce, right? So there's a lot of different pros and cons, I think, to weigh out. But definitely Genshin has been marred a lot by conversation around gacha because it is the first globally successful gacha game, even though gacha has been around for a long time, especially in Asia. And I think what Star Rail has done slightly different is when you start, you get a lot of free characters. With Genshin, you technically get 4 at the beginning and then 2 if you just do a couple of quests. But with Star Rail, like there are so many upfront. There's Danheng, there's Trailblazer, there's Serval, which everyone got because they got like 20 million downloads before the game, 20 million registrations before the game was even launched. There's who else have you got? Natasha, you've got Hook. I think Hook is a free to play character.
I don't know.
Is she not?
No, it's
she's
the
like
other one.
she's a little
Yeah, not Hook, but there's another one.
Not Hook, but Astra. She's free as well. So she's the one she's like the pink one at the beginning.
I know. I call her Kairi from Kingdom Hearts.
Oh yeah, Kairi. Yeah, so you get quite a bunch, and they're not crap. Like a lot of the theory crafters have been making videos being like, don't sleep on the characters just because they're free. Like I know previously in Genshin you might be like, oh my god, like Kaya is terrible or like Amber is terrible, but these characters are actually good if you know how to build them. And by that nature, I think then there's less of an emphasis on the gacha aspect because you don't need to be paying to get through the content. You can get through the content quite sufficiently just with like these free characters. And also the last thing is like the beginner banner that we get. So in Genshin, the beginner banner is 20 pulls and you will get, I think it's 20 pulls, and you will get a 4-star. Like you always get a 4-star because every temple you get 4. But with Honkai, you get a 5-star after, is it 40 pulls or 50 pulls? Like no matter what, like as long as you spend, like it's kind of like almost like a reward of like, hey, you've played, I don't know, 6 or 8 hours of Star Rail. It seems like you like it. Here, have your 5-star character. So it's not like the barrier to get a good character is like not all the way up here and like paywalled, right? As long as if you like the game, you're naturally just going to get to this point where you will get at least one. So I think that those are things that they've done to make the game a bit more accessible and just less of like this is a cash cow for Hoyoverse.
Like you don't feel it. I think it's like me a couple days into this game and I've been playing a lot, right? It's like I don't feel like gotta spend money to get this like thing, right? And it's like I think you got mad at me because I got some pretty solid polls over the past like
I was days. Like no, I thought you'd spend money. I was like, what?
Yeah, and I'm not afraid of spending money. But it was like, no, it's all free. For now, I'm going to say that I'm not going to spend money on it. And it's not that I shame Wales for it. It's just that I was like, the game is so new and you are literally getting your 5-star like around the corner. Like, for me, it didn't make sense. But also, I'm saving up for the next banner. So that's why I'm not pulling on the Sealy banner. Yeah, I've seen the pictures, right? Silverhead fox. No, but talk about like the reasons why this game is also maybe pulling more of a mainstream audience versus Genshin. Is like, to me, even mechanics wise, it's like, I want to reference a couple of games that I thought of when playing Honkai Star Rail, where immediately I didn't realize, because I saw no gameplay before downloading it, right? So much of Final Fantasy X, like type of mechanic, like that turn-based thing, and you even see the little thing in the left corner about like who's coming next. Yeah, who's gonna come next.
It's very strategic. Yeah.
That, and then even the JRPG elements of like having a shield break. And I know there are other games that do this, but to me, the one that in my mind that always comes to mind is the stagger gauge in Final Fantasy 13. So it's like you build up the stagger, break the stagger, and then like attack, right? And then even things like the style of animation when they do their ultimates is like Persona 5's ultimates as well. So they're taking so much influence from JRPGs that are successful and phenomenal, and then not modernizing it, but just like building on those mechanics and putting them all in one game, where it's like, oh, what if Persona 5 met Final Fantasy X or something like that, right? Like, it's awesome to me. But the beautiful thing about why Hoyoverse is such a fascinating dev for me is that like, it's just the small touches where I think of them as an Asian developer. I don't think of them as like, traditionally Western developer when, Final Fantasy, I guess, especially with 15 and 16, they're becoming more of like
Western.
Yeah. Western type developer, right? As opposed to like JRPG or RPG, like the Trail series or whatever. But, it's so cool where I found a flipping Bloodborne reference in the game, and it's such a small throwaway thing. And I was going through the dialogue. I'm like, hold on. Is that, you know what I mean? And then it's like, and I'll pull up the Twitter thing, or I'm sure somebody's made a video about it or whatever, right? Where it's like, it's literally a Bloodborne reference where you're talking to the person on the other side of the window, and it's like very similar dialogue about losing their sister. And I'm like, Honkai Star Rail just referenced Bloodborne, right? Like, that's flipping awesome. And then like you go through it, and then I unlock this character called Clara. And she's this tiny little girl, and she's protected by a giant robot, right? And I was like, me, obviously, I was like, oh, is this an Evangelion reference, right? And then I'm like, no, it's a BioShock reference, and BioShock's one of my favorite games of all time, where it's like the character is literally called, because in BioShock, the little sister is protected by the giant things, the giant robot things. God, what are my Bioshock knowledge is? I haven't played this game for so long, right? But they're called Mr. Bubbles, right?
Okay,
and she's
yeah,
always
yeah.
like, oh, like Mr. like save
Farog.
me, help me, Mr. Bubbles or whatever, right? I'm just trying to find the name, but like, what is Clara? Is like,
Mrs. Farog.
yeah, Mrs. Farog, right?
Yeah.
And it's just like, there again, I think like Star Rail is one of those impactful moments to me where they are no longer a developer to me that's making games for a certain region of the world or from a certain region for a certain region of the world. They're truly a global developer. So it's just like, yeah, just so many amazing games come to mind. And I think with respect to, it's not like small, tiny, insignificant references. Like, oh, there's care in the story and the references they're pulling in this game. So those are surprises to me that I loved.
I've got a few references as well. All right, so I think this one is like pretty universal, and you must have noticed it as well. Like, there's that scene where they go and like Dan Heng is like in the ring and he's about to fight someone, and just before that they're like, "Oh, where did Dan Heng go?" And they're like, "Oh, he's at the Fight Club." And then your dialogue response is like, "We're not supposed to talk about that. We don't talk about Fight Club." I was like, that's so funny. And then another earlier one on, which I thought was just beautiful in the way that they phrased it, because someone talked about the different universes there are, and they're like, "Oh, it's all about the metaverse." And then one of your dialogue responses is like, "Oh no, we're not jumping on that train." And it's just like so iconic to like the current just like general political tech space, and also the fact that it's Star Rail, the train. So it's like we're not jumping on that particular train. I thought it was like so funny. Then this one, like, I was gonna send this to you before the podcast, but I'll send it to you after. I need to figure out where it is in the menu, but like there's like an archive section, right? And I saw this video that this content creator made. We'll link it and all of that. So she goes into this archive because the chat tells her to go to it, and it's like a quote about I think it's like characters' defense or like breaking down systems or something. And then the quote at the end is just like, "Don't worry, like he's never gonna give you up. He's never gonna let you."
Yeah.
And the quote is like, it's like attributed to Ask Rickley. I'm like, are you serious? Is this
and that's why again, like I think Hoyoverse is starting to become some of my favorite devs. It's like the amount of fun that they have in the game. Did you see the your main call to action in the game? I think a couple hours in is like you can either choose to go on the train,
or you can your game just ends there, right?
Then like if you choose to decline, your game ends and they put up a fake credit roll or whatever, and then you start to the main menu, and it's like the amount of fun that they have. Like I got an achievement where there's things in the world where you can interact with the trash cans.
Oh, you got the trash can achievement.
I was like, this can't be an accident, right? Like why do they have the trash can here? So I kept like doing the trash can, like just like do the dialogue of the trash can, and it was like a reference of like once you dig through the trash can, there's no coming back from this or whatever. It's like you were just a trash human being.
Trash,
and then you get a little trash can achievement. I think there was one about the paintings.
The wanted posters.
The wanted posters.
And then if you talk to all of them, you get like this ugly ass like depiction of your character as like an icon. It's like wanted poster.
Yeah, so it's just such a fascinating one to me where I didn't realize. I think like Genshin has always been again comedic and funny and fun, and there is levity and there's joyousness.
But nowhere near as good as this. Honestly,
yeah, there's like
Genshin is not funny in this.
It's almost like class, like the classy type of like low hanging fruit humor, that just weirdly works. So again, like. Is Honkai Star Rail a game of the year? Like,
it could be. I mean, that's the thing, right? Like, it's funny, and it's like they don't take themselves too seriously, and it's such a gamble with these things. It could this could be really cringe, this could be really funny, but so far it's mostly been very funny. There is one more reference that I'll mention, which is not related to other media, but it's about like there's this fan theory that Honkai the Third, Honkai Star Rail, and Genshin are all sort of like intertwined, and and you can see that in like why are the characters having similar names, and I don't just mean like the one I mentioned earlier, like Bronya in Third and Bronya in Star Rail. I mean like Raiden A in Genshin. There's a Raiden character in Honkai the Third as well. Fischl is in Genshin and she's in Honkai the Third, and that sort of thing. So in Star Rail early on, there's like this room where I think they're putting like old. Not relics, like relics are like your equipment, like just like old stuff from like the past. It's almost like a museum. And one of the things that was like sort of floating there is the beginner wings from Genshin. I don't know if you saw that.
That's so cool. I didn't see that. I know what you're talking about, but I didn't see that. Yeah,
like the ugly wings in Genshin that your characters are equipped with. So, and I think if you talk to it, it tells you like this is from the past or some reference to that. So then it's like, okay, so then really like Genshin is like the prehistoric age before Star Rail. Is that what they're trying to allude here? So perhaps there will be a game later on or a way that all of these games are just going to kind of meet in the middle or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to talk about like the future of Hoyoverse in general, because I had to think about this, right? Where and this relates, where I think we talked about it. It's like, are they creating their own Marvel Cinematic Universe type thing and like multiverse type thing? Because that's like totally the in now, even though comics have been doing it for forever, right?
Yeah, comics have been doing like canons and like alt universes and then
Exactly.
like Dark Spider-Man and like all sorts of
Let me
different.
talk about anime and let me talk about Cardcaptor Sakura, Tsubasa Chronicles, and XXX Holic and how they all relate to each other despite being in separate universes. No, but besides that, I wanted to like have a conversation about like it seems like we both love Star Rail, right? But to me, it's fascinating where what is the future of Hoyoverse, right? And what are they actually building towards? Because in my mind, I think that they're probably going to be one of the most notable developers of the next like 7-10 years, and following the like they're going to be the next Blizzard or the next Riot, right? Where they're almost multi-conglomerate gaming companies that aren't known for one thing, but started with one thing and exploded, and then they filtered off to do a bunch of other stuff, right? Because to me, it's like, okay, you've got your action adventure like gacha game like Genshin, which is like your biggest success or whatever. Then you have your JRPG, right? So then you capture the JRPG market, then you make one of the biggest like JRPGs there. Like, what is next? I think I was like,
You know,
they
they
should
also
just
have
do
one more game, right?
Yeah, no, I know what.
Like, so you know, they have like there's Honkai the Third. There's
Yeah, I know they
Genshin,
have a lot
there's
more games.
Style.
Yeah.
No, but the other like also very popular game, Tears of Timus.
Yes.
Yeah, it's like a visual. It's like a dating sim card game. So that's just another like
another
game they're doing.
Right, and then I guess like the things that come to mind is God, what's the game that's coming out that I was super interested by? The
Tears of the
Triple
Kingdom?
Z. God.
Zenless Zone Zero.
Zenless Zone Zero.
Oh,
right?
the game with the furry.
yeah, the game with the furry. Like that to me, it's like, what is that game? What are they trying to capture? What are they doing with that thing, right? But besides that, it's like, okay, I was like, you make a TV show out of all this. Like the characters are so resonant with so many people. Everybody's cosplaying them at cons. You make a TV show.
Genshin's coming out with
it. Yeah, I forgot they announced an anime already.
Genshin's
It's like
got the anime.
just they're treating this as like they're accelerating IP, like the IP acceleration. In terms of how do you milk the most out of this IP is just like so smart and so brilliantly done. Where in my prediction is like, why is Hoyoverse like potentially some of the best devs in the next couple of years, right? They have some of the best animation in games. The gameplay loop is phenomenal. They're making so much money from a revenue perspective. They're definitely not going to go away, right? Which is another thing in like game development. Music is awesome, and they always highlight music. And it's like, you know, when you have phenomenal video game music, you're almost elevated into a different level of like video games, right?
Yeah.
And then it's like, okay, what did they do next? Like, I can totally see them doing a fighting game, like a 2D fighting game, a la Riot as well, where you have the same characters, but you take over the fighting game genre, right? And like you have your Hoyoverse version of a 2D fighting game or a 3D fighting game, right? As one vertical, you capture the fighting game market. And then the second thing is like, I could totally see them doing a single player smaller experience, but featuring some of the characters in Genshin or Honkai or whatever, where it's like you capture the single game like market as well. Because I think again, it's like if you take like Riot as a comparable, I think they're closely related to a Riot nowadays, where's the esports, right? Like element to it. I know they're experimenting. There's a lot of stuff.
They've been experimenting.
But like again, I think Riot and Hoyoverse are going to be like neck and neck in terms of like putting out strong IP for games that make a shit ton of money, but will allow them to also experiment into different video game avenues. But I wanted to ask you, like, what's the future of Hoyoverse in your mind?
I mean, since you were talking about like different mediums, I thought like a physical card game would be on the cards. As well, because I know that
Genshin
TCG which is a really unfortunate thing, because like I think it's really sort of stagnated just because while there is a PvP element, there's no rewards for it, and every time that they do that, there's just like no incentive to play. It's part of the daily, so I know some friends who are playing it just to collect the rolls, but they don't care about it, and they're not caring about finessing their deck. Once they have a deck that works, that's it. So I wonder if it does become like a physical card game, if they do start to institutionalize the competitions, which I have seen they are doing that a bit more, especially at like a university level. I wonder if that's gonna like really sweep there's the card game scene.
Yeah, I think we talked about this on a previous episode. Their card game is it's like, it shouldn't be that good. The card game mechanic in Genshin should not be that good. It is a phenomenal TCG, in-game TCG. It just reminds me of Gwent's. Like, talk about, again, some of the best video game developers of the world. You pull a CD Projekt Red. You spin off Gwent's. I know they didn't do too well successfully after, and like they did end up like sunsetting, I think, overall support for Gwent's. But yeah, make that into a whole separate thing, or at least like accentuate it more so that more people play Genshin. Like,
Yeah.
I guess this whole conversation around, I know you love Hoyoverse, and I mean you love Genshin. I didn't expect to fall in love with Honkai Star Rail, and then by proxy I didn't realize like how much I would fall in love, or I guess just be hyper fascinated by Hoyoverse as a company. Like weirdly I feel like they're so underrated in traditional the game zeitgeist, and the conversation around them is like quite rudimentary, where yeah, to me I just think like the conversation around Hoyoverse and Star Rail and Genshin and all that is going to change, especially after this game.
I do want to make one more call out as well, which we didn't touch upon. We talked about the music, but we didn't talk about the voice acting.
Oh my god.
Which would be almost unpatriotic of us for many reasons. But I also think that with anime becoming more and more popular in these last few years, but also just with Genshin, like every voice actor, especially in the Western world, like the English voice acting, where it's not as developed an industry as the Japanese market or the Chinese market, it feels like everyone who gets an opportunity on Genshin just gets like catapulted to success. It's like the big break, right? And there's a lot of voice actors shared across the different Genshin and the previous Honkai and the current Honkai. So like I'll start with these ones first. So like Alejandro Saab, he voices Sino in Genshin, and he's apparently, it's not confirmed, but it's basically confirmed. Like the company hasn't announced it yet, but he's like the voice actor for Jing Yuan, who's going to be the next 5-star on the banner. You also have Danny Chambers, who is Arlen, and also Nilo, which is interesting. So Nilo from Genshin, Arlen from Honkai. But I know the one that we both want to talk about is Suling Chan, who is a Malaysian voice actress, and she's voicing Bailu in Honkai Star Rail.
One of the best healers in the game, apparently.
The best. I think she has like resurrection abilities or something.
I don't know.
I'm trying
I haven't unlocked Suling yet.
I'm like, man, if I do, okay, I'm 100% committed to my free-to-playness right now, but if I was going to spend money, it would be if I can get a guaranteed Suling in the game, for sure.
Not even Bailu, just Suling.
Not just Suling. No, but like super amazing work, and I really hope this catapults her to further success, which it seems like it really, really does.
Yeah, and I think like Suling has been, I guess, like one of the most just iconic like games, like TV show kind of voice actors that Malaysia has produced as of late. Because I know one of the really big games that she was in was No Straight Roads as well. I like played one of the lead characters in No Straight Roads alongside friend of the show Stephen Bones, of course.
Yeah.
Stephen, I miss you. When are we hanging out next time, man?
Just calling out his friends on the podcast. We just said we had no friends anymore. Remember?
We have no friends on the podcast. Yeah, no, but it's just amazing because you're right. Like talk about Suling's talents. Like obviously phenomenal voice actor, and like totally deserved of voicing a character in Honkai Star Rail, right? And these voice actors, like you said, it's like it's almost as if like people go feral for some of these voice actors in these games, which is awesome, and I think she totally deserves it. But then the second thing is like also just a representation thing. Like they hosted a whole event in collaboration with Honkai Star Rail over here in Kuala Lumpur over the past weekend.
Yeah.
And I know Suling was there. I wasn't at the event. I know a couple of friends were at the event
photos.
as well.
Yeah, it looked really cool.
Yeah. But it's just so cool to have like even voice actors from different parts of the world like do characters in the games, meaningful characters. But then secondly, like to be able to like celebrate that within the game. Like they put art about like, the characters coming to Malaysia. It was like super cute.
Oh yeah, when they were in Kuala Lumpur and they're like the express has arrived, and then they have the Twin Towers in the background.
The Twin Towers in the background, yeah.
Yeah.
It's just super cute, but it's like, again, from a business perspective, like how many more people are going to download the game because Suling isn't? Like how many more Malaysian players are going to download the game because Suling isn't?
Yeah,
but then beyond that, it's like, I think, she's amazing. I haven't unlocked her though, but I feel like I'm going to spam some of those voice lines.
Yeah, I haven't heard her yet, and obviously I'm not as embedded in the voice acting scene to really speak too much to it. But I feel like on top of just like having a diverse cast, like the voices and the accents are also quite interesting. Like with
totally.
Dan Heng, like I don't know what to place his accent. I think he might be an Asian American voice actor, but he just doesn't sound like a typical American cartoon character kind of voice. He I like. Initially, it was a little bit, I don't know if jarring is right. It was just really surprising for me. But he has a really cool sort of like, it's almost deadpan, but it's also kind of funny sometimes. It's just very cool. I don't know how else to describe it, but it's just unique, and it's nice that they're incorporating, because it's a sci-fi game. It's like no one is from like one particular part of the world, right? So everyone's got a different voice.
And you know why this reminds me so much of like just doing comparables against other amazing video game developers, right? It's like Overwatch, I think, had very similar things where you had a very, very diverse cast in Overwatch, but also the voice actors were.
Oh, there was the Filipino voice actors who voiced like an Asian character in the game, isn't there? Oh, I'm thinking of Valorant.
You're thinking of Valorant, yeah.
Yeah,
and then
yeah.
I was just gonna say, and then you have Valorant as well, right? So
Yeah.
Blizzard, Riot, and then for me, Apex with Respawn. It's like all their characters as well have very diverse backgrounds, and they show it in their voice acting as well. So whether it be like Asian mannerisms, or maybe somebody who's like an older person versus a younger person, and like how they would act, or like a British accent versus an American accent, or somebody who's from just different parts of the world, right? Whether it be Australia or Africa or like Europe. There's just so much diversity in these types of AAA games. Where again, I feel like following in the path, like Star Rail and maybe Hoyoverse, they're trying to capture that aspect of globalization too, right? Where you activate the market, you get the players in the market, whatever, but also just from a breath of fresh air. It's like, people speak differently in different parts of the world. Like, let's celebrate that in video games, and it's like totally normalized. It's like it's not weird, right?
Yeah.
And you're not going to Star Wars theory it where it's like, oh, Rey has a British accent, therefore she's a descendant of Obi-Wan Kenobi, because those are the only two characters that have a British accent in like Star Wars. It's like,
oh my god,
no, people have different accents because people are from different parts of the world.
Yeah. Oh, that's exciting. Yeah, it's a great game. Hope this episode doesn't age poorly, and then like next episode it's like, oh, we don't, what is that game again that we were playing?
Exactly.
But so far really enjoying it, and there's a lot of content to clear, so
I think my closing thoughts on Star Rail is, TLDR, is that more people should be playing this game. I don't know again how long the interest is going to last for me, but it is just the initial ramp of like how much I love this game is so violently exponential that to me, at the very least, people should try it, and it is respectable. I'm fascinated to see where it goes, and I wonder if this is, to me, this is already better than Genshin. Just speaks to me personally, but on a macro side of things, like again, there's some masterful things that are happening on an execution side of things in this video game, and it is so mind blowing to me, and I'm so happy I tried this. Like, it's just so flipping good. And also, if your name is Junshin and you're pulling 5-star characters left, right, and center, you don't have to tweet about that. You know what I mean? Like, you keep that to yourself.
Did you see his latest
everybody's
tweet?
warranted a one like 5-star character tweet. Like, hey, I pulled this character. I put it out there. I saw other people put it out there. But when you pull 2 5-star characters and you tweet about it, you should get canceled from Twitter.
You can only talk about your one Ferrari, not your second Ferrari car.
Exactly.
Right? After that, it's just insane.
Yeah, exactly. What are your final thoughts on Honkai Star Rail?
I really like the turn-based mechanic. I don't know if it's like showing my age or something, but I just found it really funny when some people were like, "Oh, it's turn-based? Like that retro? Like is that gonna be okay?" I'm like, I definitely saw people saying that. I'm like, dude, is this for real?
Children,
are you old enough to play this game? I love it. I think it's a great sort of like a passive game. I don't feel pressured to play in the way that Genshin often it felt like it was like that. Voice acting great. Music has been pretty good. Not as forward to the front as Genshin has been, but I think we'll expect a lot more considering it is Hoyoverse. And just excited to see how this grows, especially in just the general public sphere, since I know that like Genshin is so normie that even my parents know, and I wonder if like my parents will soon know the name of Danheng in Star Rail.
Just bring the cardboard cutout home or something like that.
Yeah. No, great game.
Yeah, I'm excited for my Star Rail journey, and I'm totally gonna spend money.
You heard it here first, guys.
I was putting it out there.
Folks.
I will likely spend money on this game.
Yep. All right. Well, I think those are the 2 main topics you wanted to cover off. Were there any final updates you wanted to share, Arief, on your side? What else are you working on?
What else am I working on? I just wrapped up LudoNarraCon. That was it. No, I just want to play more video games. Like Honkai Star Rail has inspired me to get back into playing more games, because I've been playing a lot of independent game experiences, which are quite, they're more vignettes, they're more like shorter time, shorter game experiences and things like that. But I feel like I'm going to be playing a lot more longer games as well. It just like inspired me to get back into just playing more large scale experiences. So I can't wait to talk about more of that. I will end this episode on my side by saying I watched Suzume over the Suzume over this past week, and I'm just gonna say this on the podcast. I'm gonna say this statement, and we can close the episode.
Oh my god!
If your name is Makoto Shinkai's Spirited Away, then Suzume is his Princess Mononoke. And that's all I'm going to say. I'm not even going to expound on that statement.
I'm sorry, who is this? I don't security. Please escort this gentleman off the set.
And I have so much to say about this, but I'm not going to bring it up on the podcast. It's going to be a mystery why I made that statement.
That's it.
It's almost like the mystery of why we're called a 20M podcast.
Yeah, it's ask us. If you're confused, if you want to know the origins of 20M, let us know in the comments, and we might reveal it soon.
What about you? What's coming up for you?
I've been watching an anime called Oshinoko, which I think I can go into more detail when there are more episodes out. But I really, really recommend everyone to check it out. It's got the weirdest premise. It's like a surgeon who helped an idol give birth in the countryside. And then through a series of events, he gets reincarnated to be one of the twins that she gave birth to. But it's like the most bizarre thing. But the first episode, which is an hour and a half long, is basically a movie, is probably one of the best episodes of anime I've seen this year, or maybe in the last 12 months. Really, really good. But there's only been 2 episodes out on Netflix right now, so I can't say much more than that. But
I think I want to give it a shot. And like, for the record, I know the whole anime bit is a joke, but like, for the record, I want to put this down also in a statement. I have finished Licorice Recoil completely. So I finished one anime show. That's number 1.
Your first anime?
No, it's not my first anime.
No,
not my first anime.
Yeah, it is.
I finished that one, and I am a quarter way through the original Trigun.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm catching up on Trigun as well.
Oh, maybe I should. I want to get into the new Trigun. It looks so beautiful.
Yeah, I want to watch new Trigun as well. And Star Wars Visions comes out this upcoming week, and so I think season 1 of Star Wars Vision is like some of the most slept on anime of recent times. Can't wait to watch more. Can't wait to play more games. Can't wait to watch more anime. I can't wait to do more panels as well. That's not a tease. I'm not actually. I don't have a slate of more panels coming out outside of LudoNarraCon as of yet.
We'll see. All right. Well, thanks everyone for listening on to our 10th episode. If you like more of this content, what else can we recommend for them to check out?
I think some of my favorite episodes are all our episodes, so go check out all our episodes. No. Like, jokes aside, like we don't have a guest on this episode. We wanted to be like, this is more return to form, talk about the things that we love, talk about some interesting topics in the games and nerd ecosystem. But please, like, if you want to learn more about the people behind video games and behind some cool stuff, like, you know, Zorzi's episode about working on Steven Universe, this might not be game related, but we did a whole segment about like what it was like to work on the Steven Universe movie. That was awesome, right? Sophie talking about like what does it mean to be part of the future class of video games 2022 and like what does it mean to produce independent games. Go check out Sophie's episode. We just released an episode with Sakina about Cabaret and a deep dive about like cultural history and independent games and stuff like that. Like go check them out. Go check a lot of our episodes out. I'm really excited about some of those conversations.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thanks so much, everyone. We'll speak soon. Take care. See ya.
We need a 20M outro.
Yeah, outro.
We'll 20M you later. That sounds
like sexual harassment, and I refuse to be part of it.
It does. I'll 20.
See you in the next 20M.
See you in the next 20M, dude. That's such a good outro.